The first time Marcus Castellano saw my review, he threw a plating tweezers across his kitchen. I know this because the sous chef told me. I'd given his restaurant, Amore, a supposedly revolutionary new Italian-American concept in Brooklyn, 3 stars. Which sounds good until you know that 4 stars means culinary excellence, and 3 stars means good, but with significant flaws. The significant flaws were that his pasta was overworked, his sauce lacked depth, and his dessert course was basically theatrical bullshit designed to impress Instagram instead of the actual mouth. My name is Nathan Brooks. I'm 31, a freelance food critic for some of the most respected publications in New York, and I have spent the last 12 years developing a palate that doesn't bullshit. When I taste food, I taste intention. I taste care. I taste whether the chef actually gives a damn or is just chasing press. Marcus Castellano, apparently, cared very much, because 2 weeks after my review dropped, I got an email. From him. Directly. You clearly have a palate, it said. But you have no idea what you're tasting. I'd like to change that. Come back. Let me cook for you. Not as a critic. As a person. I'd gotten angry emails before. I'd gotten cease and desists. I'd gotten threats. I'd gotten marriage proposals from people who thought my review of their restaurant was actually about my emotional availability. But I'd never gotten an invitation like this. My instinct was to say no. My job was to be objective. My job was to taste food and tell the truth about it. My job was not to have dinner with angry chefs who wanted to change my mind. But there was something in that email. Something that wasn't aggressive or defensive. Something that said, you tasted something wrong. Let me show you. I said yes. Amore was empty when I arrived. 10 p.m. on a Tuesday, restaurant closed. Just kitchen lights on and the smell of garlic and basil and something I couldn't identify. Marcus was at the stove. He was tall, maybe 6 feet 2 inches, with dark hair and olive skin and hands that moved, like they were having a conversation with the food. He was wearing chef's whites, sleeves rolled up, forearms tattooed with Italian words I'd need to ask about. Nathan Brooks, he said, not turning around. Welcome to my kitchen. I appreciate the gesture, I said carefully. But I'm not sure what this accomplishes. Your review was correct. He turned then, and his eyes were dark brown and absolutely serious. The pasta was overworked. The sauce lacked depth. The dessert was Instagram bullshit. I hadn't expected that. I was angry when I read it, he continued. Angry because you were right, and I already knew you were right, and instead of being angry at myself, I was angry at you for saying it out loud. So why invite me back? Because the things you missed, the things you couldn't taste, those are what I actually care about. He turned back to his stove. And I want you to taste them. He cooked for me that night in a way I'd never experienced before. Not plating. Not presentation. Not the art of cooking. Just cooking. Pure intention. Each dish built on the last. Each flavor a conversation with the previous one. First. Pasta, but different than what was on the menu. Thinner. Fresher. Treated like it was alive instead of like it was something to show off. This pasta is made with eggs from a farm upstate, Marcus said, watching me eat. The hens eat a specific seed mixture. That changes the yolk color. That changes the flavor profile. Most chefs won't spend 2 hours finding the right farm for eggs because they think it's pretentious. It's not pretentious. It's respectful. The sauce tasted like summer. Like tomatoes that had actually been allowed to ripen instead of being picked green and ripened in a truck. Like basil that had been handled with care. Like butter that knew what it was doing. This is... I couldn't finish the sentence. Real, Marcus said simply. You tasted real. Then, risotto, which I normally hated because most chefs made it into a starchy mess. But this risotto had the consistency of, I don't have better words, the consistency of love. Of someone standing over a pot for 45 minutes, stirring, listening to what the rice was telling them. The rice is carnaroli, Marcus said. It holds its shape better than arborio. Most chefs don't know that. Or they know and don't care. They think all risotto rice is the same. What's the stock? Chicken. But not store-bought. Made with bones from a butcher I've known for 15 years. He saves the bones specifically for me. I was falling in love with him and I didn't even know his last name yet. Then, fish. Branzino, simple, just salt and lemon and heat. But cooked in a way that meant the flesh stayed tender while the skin stayed crispy, which shouldn't be possible. Most chefs cook fish too fast or too slow, Mise said. They're scared of it. Fish is forgiving if you respect it, brutal if you don't. I'd eaten at Michelin restaurants. I'd eaten at restaurants that cost $300 per person. I'd eaten food that was technically perfect, but I'd never eaten food that tasted like someone cared this much. By dessert, a simple panna cotta made with vanilla and topped with fresh berries. I understood what had happened. I'd come here ready to critique. I'd come here as a critic, and Mise had cooked me into someone who could only taste love. Why did you do this? I asked. Because you tasted the truth about my cooking, he said. And no one else has. No one else has been brave enough to say it wasn't good enough yet. And then you showed up, and I realized you actually saw me. You saw the restaurant was me trying too hard to be famous instead of trying hard to be good. And now I'm trying to be good. He met my eyes across the table. And I want you to taste that. Asterisk, I came back the next week, and the week after that, and then every week, sometimes twice a week, Mise would close the restaurant and cook for me. Not as a critic. As someone he was trying to feed, the way you feed people you love. That I should have been objective. I should have maintained distance. I should have remembered that my job was to tell the truth about restaurants, not to fall in love with their chefs. I did not maintain distance. What started as criticism became collaboration. I'd sit at the kitchen counter and watch him work, and I'd make suggestions. Not critic suggestions. Human suggestions. This needs acidity, I'd say. Lemon or vinegar. White wine vinegar. Something that won't overpower the fish. He'd adjust. Immediately. Without defending himself. Without explaining why he'd chosen what he'd chosen. Just, okay, let me tell you why. It was the most intimate thing I'd ever experienced that didn't involve touching, and then we touched. It was accidental, or maybe not accidental. His hand was reaching for salt at the same moment I was reaching for the pan handle. Our fingers brushed, and instead of pulling away, we both froze. Nathan, he said. And it was a question. Yeah, I said, which wasn't an answer but was. He kissed me there in his kitchen with the smell of garlic in our hair and the heat from the stove on our faces. It tasted like salt and wine and intention. This is a bad idea, I said when we broke apart. Why? Because I'm a critic. You're a chef. This is exactly the kind of conflict of interest that destroys careers. Then don't write about me anymore, Mise said simply. Recuse yourself. Tell your editors you have a personal relationship with the chef. Be honest. And then what? I lose access to half of Brooklyn's restaurants because word gets out that I'm compromised. Or, he said, you stop pretending that critics can be objective about art. You admit that everything is subjective. You admit that the best writing comes from actual human connection, not from pretending to be a machine. I can't do that. Why not? I didn't have a good answer. We kept it secret for 3 months, which was stupid. I know now that it was stupid. But at the time, it felt necessary. Mise was building something real at Amore, changing the menu, changing his approach, changing himself. He didn't need the distraction of being known as the chef dating the critic. And I didn't need the reputation of being compromised. So we were careful. I'd come to the restaurant after it closed. We'd cook together. We'd eat together. We'd fall asleep together on the office couch, tangled up in each other like. We'd been waiting our whole lives to finally fit together, but secrets have an expiration date. It expired. When my editor sent me to do a feature on up-and-coming chefs in Brooklyn, and Mise was on the list. A list compiled by people who didn't know I was sleeping with him. You can't do this story, I said to my editor, Patricia. I have a conflict of interest. What kind of conflict? Personal. She looked at me over her glasses. Nathan, you've never recused yourself from anything. What happened? I could have lied. I could have made up something about needing a break from writing about Italian restaurants. I could have come up with a dozen professional-sounding reasons. Instead, I'm in a relationship with Marcus Castellano. Patricia was quiet for a long moment. Then, the The same Marcus Castellano you gave 3 stars. Yes. And now you think you're compromised. I know I'm compromised. Interesting. She leaned back in her chair. When was the last time you visited his restaurant? 2 weeks ago. And what did you eat? Branzino, risotto, pasta. Did it taste good? Yes. Then write about it. I can't. I'm sleeping with him. So was MFK Fisher sleeping with half of California. And she's the greatest food writer who ever lived. Patricia took off her glasses. Nathan, the idea that critics can be objective is bullshit. All taste is subjective. All writing is personal. The question isn't whether you're compromised. The question is whether you're honest about how you're compromised. What does that mean? It means you write the story. You disclose the relationship. You let readers know that you're in love with this chef, and then you tell them what that means about how you taste his food. I stared at her. Write the story, she said. Be honest. Let's see what happens. Asterisk, I told Marcus that night. Patricia wants me to write about you, and she wants me to disclose that we are together. He was silent for a long time. That will destroy the restaurant. Probably. People will say you only gave me a good review because you love me. No. They'll say the restaurant is only good because of the publicity. No. So why would you do it? Because Patricia's right. Because pretending to be objective is bullshit. Because I'm tired of lying. Marcus sat down. I'm terrified. I know. What if they're right? What if they destroy everything I've built? Then we rebuild, I said. Together. He looked at me like he was trying to decide if I was real. I love you, I said. It was the first time I'd said it. And that makes me a bad critic. And that makes you a bad restaurant to review objectively. And that means I have to choose between my job and my integrity. What are you choosing? Integrity. You. Love. The truth. The article came out on a Sunday. I fell in love with a chef. On Objectivity, Desire, and Branzino was the headline that I opened with my original 3-star review. I explained why I'd given it. The flaws were real. The chef was trying too hard. Then I explained that I'd come back, and the chef had cooked for me, and I'd tasted something that changed how I understood food. That I wrote about the eggs from the upstate farm. I wrote about the risotto that took 45 minutes and infinite care. I wrote about the branzino that was simple enough to break your heart, and then I wrote, I fell in love with this chef. That makes me a terrible critic. It also makes me a better writer. Because now I understand that the best food is cooked by people who understand that feeding someone is an act of love. And I'm here to tell you that Marcus Castellano loves you through every bite. I disclosed our relationship. I recommended the restaurant, not 3 stars, but 4. 4 stars. That meant, this is a chef who has figured out that technical perfection doesn't matter if there's no soul behind it. The piece went viral, not in a bad way. In a people are desperate to believe in love way. The restaurant was booked solid for 6 months. We had people calling from California, from Miami, from across the country wanting reservations. And yes, some people said the review was compromised. Some people said I was just writing about my boyfriend. Some people said it was nepotism and favoritism and bullshit. But most people said, this is what food criticism should be. Honest. Human. Real. Asterisk 6 months later. Marcus and I bought a restaurant together, not Amore. That was his thing, and it was thriving. But a smaller place in Williamsburg. Something we could build from nothing. Something that was ours. I mostly stopped writing about restaurants. Partially because of conflict of interest. Partially because I realized I cared more about feeding people than about telling people about food, but I still write. About Marcus. About what it means to cook for someone you love. About how the best meals are always personal. Do you regret it? I asked him one night, after service. We were in our kitchen, the real kitchen, not the restaurant kitchen, the kitchen where we cooked for ourselves. Regret what? Going public. Letting everyone know. Losing the ability to hide. He was making pasta. Simple pasta, the kind we ate at home. Not for anyone else, not for critics, not for Instagram. Just for us. No, he said. You know why. Why? Because the hardest part of being a chef is the loneliness. You spend all day feeding people, and then you go home alone. You spend all day creating beauty and then sleep by yourself. He looked at me, and then I met someone who tasted what I was trying to do, who understood, who loved me for it. He plated the pasta. Simple, beautiful, perfect. That's not something to hide, he said. That's something to feed. 1 year later, our restaurant, Mise, has been named to the Michelin Guide. 1 star, which is exactly right. It's not trying to be revolutionary. It's just trying to be honest. Marcus cooks. I write about other restaurants, other chefs, other stories. But every night, after service, we cook together. Simple things. Real things. Things that taste like home, and sometimes, people ask me, don't you miss being a real critic? Don't you miss the objectivity? And I tell them the truth. Objectivity was always a lie. All food writing is personal. All taste is subjective. The only question is whether you're brave enough to admit it that I was brave enough. And I got to fall in love with the most talented, passionate, heartbreaking man I've ever met. That seems like a better ending than 4 stars.